Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member KM190 gets into the details of what made him stand out from his peers in order to make it to investment banking and eventually private equity from a complete non-target. This is a two-part series since we go into a lot of depth. In part one, we cover his serendipitous meeting at an info session and his path to IB from undergrad. Enjoy. KM190, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a quick overview of your background.
Of course. So, I am a non-target student by background. So I went to a Southern school, an SEC school, very good football team. And look, we had, a handful of people each year going into high finance. And high finance, I define that as investment banking, private equity, hedge funds, even to, some extent asset management, the usual suspects. So, that's a little bit about my educational background. Professionally, I have a few years of investment banking experience in M&A, and I've also just recently started at a private equity fund. This will be my second fund. I am a lateral associate. Great. So that being said, happy to get into it.
Sure. And so at the undergrad, let's start back there. You said there's only kind of a handful of people that kind of make it into high finance, banking or whatnot. And do you feel like you were one of those people because of a specific reason, high GPA? What was it that kind of maybe set you apart?
Yeah, look, I'll be very honest and upfront. I mean, my GPA was barely, it was a little bit north of like 3.6.
Okay, well, it's not that bad.
When you look at it's not that bad.
That's, I think, right? Exactly what I had. Don't make me feel bad, man.
Yeah. but here's the thing is that, it's a pretty okay GPA for this industry. Mm-hmm. And I'm also coming from a school that doesn't really inspire any kind of, it doesn't really inspire the same kind of credibility that a typical Ivy League school would. I mean, my school was great, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of these guys, these employers. So, that's really my background there. What I think set me apart was honestly my drive, and I'll go into detail by that. But the initial thought that I had when I first came across this industry, so I'll tell you how I got into it. So, I was sitting in a room. I was pre-med at the time, and I was studying. And right across from my study room, there was this giant presentation going on.
What year were you, real quick? Were you a freshman at this point, pre-med?
I was a pre-med freshman, sophomore year, and a little bit of junior year as well.
Oh wow, okay.
And it was like beginning of my third year, basically, where I was sitting here studying, and right across, the hall, there was this presentation going on. It was an investment banker who came by and gave a presentation to all these kids, and no one knew what investment banking was. And so it's like he was speaking a different language, but he was trying his hardest to help us understand, what he does. Of course, there were a lot of ridiculous questions. I was in the background. I didn't understand anything because I wasn't finance at all at that point.
Right.
But look, it was a natural, completely unforced curiosity that got me really interested. I mean, just him talking, I came up to him at the end of the discussion, chatted with him, asked him genuine questions. And for some weird reason, he basically wrote my name down on his notebook and said, listen, let's keep in touch. And he had talked to dozens of other kids before, kids with probably way better stats than me and way better experience than me at that point. So,
do you think because it was like you had like a genuine curiosity, he could sense that, or do you think it was something else? Like, is there a way you ask the questions that might be helpful to the listeners?
He said it was like presence, and I have no idea how to define that. I think it was just, I tried to.
Were you in a suit? Were you looking very dapper? And you held had good posture. Speaking of posture,
this is the funny thing. Actually, this might be the answer. I mean, everyone was dressed up except for me. I was over here in shorts, and everyone was in like business casual. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so out of place.
That's interesting, actually, because it was like you didn't really care. It was like you were just wanted to get the information. You weren't like trying to impress him.
Right, 100%, and it was not at all in my mind to impress him. And I'm sure the other people in the room, I mean, there's, the small handful that graduate every year into these jobs. I'm sure they understood the significance of this guy coming and the networking opportunity.
I love it.
And I'm over here saying, oh, so, okay, tell me. So it really began as like a natural interaction, as if like two people are just getting to know each other.
That's cool. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It makes sense that you had presence because you didn't care. Right. It's almost like if you're trying to go up to a girl that you're attracted to and you like her too much, it's like you just fall on your face. Whereas if you're just like you don't care
100%.
or you're taken, then all of a sudden you become so much more attractive. Right. So anyways, continue.
And it's interesting that you say that, Patrick, because this industry, the interview process, the networking process, it's so full of like this non-genuineness. It's a pervasive attitude. And honestly, I don't blame anyone for it, because you kind of have to put, like your best foot forward in every situation and maximize every opportunity. So, here is just a good anecdote. It's a stark contrast, right? Just completely unforced, don't know anything. I was very upfront about not knowing much. And I think I just asked the right questions. And, we went from there. The guy, pinged me and said, hey, I'd like you to chat with a few other people. And interestingly enough, I showed up to these conversations. These were interviews, by the way. And I showed up, of course, dressed up and everything, but I approached it again as a conversation. It was more curiosity. It was never like, okay, I have to go study up and go do this. And, and again, I think I just had the right sense to ask the right questions.
Did you feel like there was a risk there in those interviews, kind of coming at as a conversation, like as an undergrad? It seemed like you had a lot of confidence. What do you think that came from a certain place, from your upbringing, or do you feel like you ran the risk of potentially looking arrogant in those interviews, not knowing anything, being like, oh, I don't even need to study? Or did you feel like you kind of, to me, it seems like you'd have to really work that fine balance, you know what I mean, of not being too casual, in that setting.
100%.
So how did you balance that? Did you kind of have a sense for it? How much did you prep for that, for those like initial interviews?
After that initial meeting at the mass discussion, there was a little bit of studying. There was a little bit of touching up and understanding what this industry is, and
right.
And so, when I went in, there was still a little bit of that natural curiosity. But, if you look at it on spectrum, one end, kind of the arrogant guy who doesn't really care, crossing his arms, the other end is the overeager, like, okay, I'm going to have to be perfect 100%. I was probably like a 6 or a 7, towards like the more casual side.
Got it.
Hopefully I didn't come off as arrogant, but
well, obviously not. Obviously not, given how it turned out. So, all right. So, okay, continue. So, like, you had those initial first rounds, or was it on campus? Was it just kind of more exploratory? How did that work?
It was on campus, and actually, the guy, I'm not going to reveal who he is, but he basically said, and this was the coolest part to me, and I always think about this now, way after the fact. But there were 200 people that day in that big discussion, and he basically said, "Guys, don't even bother asking me for an internship because I'm only bringing on one person." And so that person was me. It's incredible, And look, I think when I reflect on my story and how I got to where I am today, we can get into all the detail. But the undergrad part, I think that it was a mix of luck. I think it was a mix of preparing correctly, asking the right questions. I also think it was a giant part, open-mindedness and being open to the possibility of what could be. And so, when this guy, who the head of the shop, was telling me, hey, here are all the deals we're working on, here are all the things we're doing, it was really exciting to hear. And so that enthusiasm, allowed me to realize early on that, hey, maybe I kind of like this kind of stuff. I like this work. And that's ultimately, I worked with him on campus, by the way. Like I was half student, And then kind of like part intern as well.
Got it.
And worked then for a good part of my undergrad. And,
this was during the year. So during the year, was this like a smaller boutique? Right. Was this a local boutique or middle market firm?
It's a smaller boutique, right? And it was an interesting arrangement. He had less than 20 people working with him, and that was that. And so look, you basically what happened was I shifted over to finance. I dropped pre-med. For the longest time I was thinking, like pre-med is miserable. I don't know how I could do this forever. And finally I just took the step and said, I like this so much more. And
what did the parents say? Were they pissed?
Surprisingly, so good question. Really good question, because there's a lot of family pressure, right?
Yeah, there is.
My parents were okay with it.
Great. That's
awesome.
They said,
listen, we don't have that much exposure to this space, but if you want to pursue it, we hear good things. Good luck.
Yeah, my dad was a doctor.
I
was pre-med my freshman year until I got a C in Bio 101, and then it was just like, okay. I took econ again. I was like, oh, I'm actually really good at this, and this is interesting to me. So
it's much better.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was that. But
right.
Okay, cool. So you're kind of interning during the year for this small boutique, kind of getting that, which is super valuable because you're getting that relevant experience for full-time recruiting, right? So that's what, after your sophomore year or after your junior year? That was your junior year summer?
So this was my junior year summer.
Got it.
And, what I ended up doing was actually extended my undergrad. So I went from 4 to 4.5 years.
Wow. Okay.
And the idea there is that, I do this boutique internship over the summer throughout the year, and then that would set me up for another larger internship the following summer. That would be the summer I would have otherwise graduated in if I had stuck with a solid 4-year track. So there was a little bit of sacrifice, but, when I was far along, I mean, you could think of it as a snowball, at the top of a mountain, just slowly gaining momentum and getting bigger. It kind of sets things into motion that were just not ready to be stopped. So I was okay pursuing it.
And so did you feel like that might look weird, like when you were graduating in December, or I assume you graduated in the winter, right? At that point?
Right.
So how did you kind of make that look, I guess, somewhat normal? Like when you were at doing the internship, like the real banking internship, right? The bigger one at the bigger bigger firm, were you specifically, did they know of your situation that you like only had half a year left? How did you kind of get around that and like the dates?
It's an interesting question, and I'm sure the answer is going to be very helpful to a lot of people. A lot of these banks don't care.
Okay.
It's actually amazing, and I'll tell you, the question never came up, and if it did, maybe it came up once in my interview process with like 10 or 11 different firms.
Yep.
They kind of said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. You're a pre-med. Okay.
Oh, it's something where they're like, okay, yeah, you reset later, so it's fine. And it happens.
Right.
And they were cool with it. Okay.
Right.
That's good to know.
Right.
Okay. So you land the bigger internship. How did you land that bigger internship? Was it again on campus recruiting, or did you have to do some legwork for that one?
So, I think the theme that I've tried to carry throughout my short professional career so far is, passion first, curiosity first, and then hard work second, because naturally one will lead to the other. And so at the point, I had done so much work with this boutique and been exposed to so much. And this guy also took, he has a reputation on my campus. People who go to my campus will now know exactly who this person is because he's very recognizable, but he takes this pride in mentoring people and exposing people. He would take me over and introduce me to lenders and other private equity funds and all these different parties. And he'd be like, okay, guys, so like, what do you do? Can you please tell my intern, what do you do? So there's this unbelievable exposure. So by the time it came time for me to go find the real big banking internship, I had so much interest and so much curiosity that I was totally fine going out and networking on my own. I must have gone, I don't know, it was like probably 24 different networking trips all across the United States. And the goal, I set a goal. I was like, listen, I'm going to get a freaking internship and go compete with these much better pedigree guys. Because at that point, now I understood the stakes. Now I understood who I was up against.
So tell me something. And, how did you have, it sounds like to me, based on just how you're going into this, how you landed that internship and just your whole presence, that you have a lot of confidence, right? And maybe, do you feel like that comes from your family being so supportive? Does that come from something else, or where do you think that comes from?
It's a really good question. I think, it's tough to put a specific.
Because like you said,
It's
you were
tough
you were
to
three,
really nail it down.
you're a 3'6", you're non-target, whatever. There's
Right.
thousands upon thousands of kids like that. So what about your like that's, I think, something that a lot of people can't, or it's much harder to learn, right? Because it's not tangible. It's not a
Right.
technical interview question. It's presence, it's charisma, it's connecting with people. It's something that also you can improve dramatically with practice. And I think people make the mistake of thinking, oh, you're either
Right.
born with it or you're not. I disagree. I think you get so much better at interviewing and networking the more you do it. But is it something that you learned earlier on? Like, were you exposed to a lot of different things growing up, that like your parents, I mean, maybe it goes back that far, where like, were you traveling? Did you see a lot of different cultures? What was your upbringing like? Just going back even further, and then we'll keep going. But I'm curious, because what
Totally.
strikes me is like, as a sophomore, it sounds like you were really confident already, which is pretty rare, I think.
Right. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's two parts. One, it is, I've always tried to err on the side of extremely respectful
Mm-hmm.
with every interaction that I had. And I think that may have left very positive impressions on people
Mm-hmm.
early on. And I think two, the element of kind of being natural in unfamiliar environments. Look, I'll be open with you. When I was in high school, I was a very quiet person. A lot of people can probably empathize with that.
Mm-hmm.
They were probably in the same position. But when I got to college, I made a pretty concerted effort to be a lot more social. I
Got it.
put myself out there. I was, every time someone invited me to go do something, I was like, sure. And it put me in a lot of weird situations, but eventually, I feel like I hit like my social stride kind of at the end of my first year in college. I was extremely social. I went from
That fast, huh?
introvert to
That
like,
fast for
right.
just like the first
And
year.
it was like it was a forced thing,
Yeah.
it was forced.
Yeah. Was it
And
comfortable for you
eventually,
all the
yeah,
time? Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
right. And eventually I kind of like shed that introverted exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And, I got into intramurals, I got into all this stuff. And so, look, I think that may be a part of it as well.
Yep.
And honestly, it was an unintended consequence. I never expected. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. If it was still introverted me from the high school years, I'm not sure that I would have been able to garner this kind of traction.
Right.
I just don't think it would have been possible. I mean, finance is full of alpha males and ultra extroverted people,
Right.
and they like to recognize other people that are extroverted.
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely.
that could actually be it. I've actually never really thought about that, but I think that could be it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so I just, because like it struck me as like somebody so young, and being able to kind of grab that attention and get that one internship and do all that, there's something different. So it's interesting. And do you think your parents, like growing up, was it something where they were, like your family situation was good or supportive? And it sounds like they were supportive of you changing directions, so that was good.
Right.
Right. I think
My dad is very extroverted as well. My family in general, look,
Good.
they're very supportive of things. I mean, the pre-medical track, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of like, all right, we want to set you up for maximum success.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure that you're going to be safe in the future. So that's really the reason for pre-med. So, they ultimately said, okay, well, this track looks interesting. It looks like there's a lot of potential here. It accomplishes what we want for you.
Right.
So I think that was implicitly, I don't think they really cared. I don't think it was like, hey, I'm going to quit and I'm going to go be an actor and go to LA.
Right. Okay. So
I don't think they would have been as supportive.
Got it. So you're in this hunt now for this larger summer internship against a lot of Ivy League kids. What you said you made how many trips around wherever? Like, did you go up to New York mostly? Where were you traveling to, and how did you figure that?
Yeah.
How did you finance that? Did your family help you? How'd you figure that out?
I got really creative.
Okay.
It was trips to Texas. It was trips to North Carolina. It was trips all around Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta has some presence, I guess. It was trips to New York. It was trips to Chicago.
When were
The
you
New
doing
York,
this?
I
Like
didn't
over
make
spring break and stuff, or the summer? Like when were you doing these?
right like during school holidays,
Mm-hmm.
but also like Fridays and over weekends.
Mm-hmm.
I would try to get these potential connections, tell them, hey guys, like, I'll be in your city afternoon on Friday or something.
Mm-hmm.
I know that typically this is when you don't want to be in the office, but I'm making this trip and I'd love to see if you could spare a few minutes. And it was very powerful, and because a lot of times, like, look, like on Wall Street Oasis, we always talk about the value of networking and getting out there and presenting yourself correctly. But, if you present yourself with humility and you show them that you pretty much have nothing to lose,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty attractive proposition. I think.
Meaning like it's only a couple minutes. You keep the ask very
Yeah.
minimal, and you say, "Hey, I'm coming all the way there." It's kind of hard. It's hard to say no, right?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, in their mind, like you almost have to, flip it a little bit and think about it from their point of view. They're saying, okay, well, do I want to go do a million other things that I could be doing, or do I take this guy? And the answer is usually, okay, well, he's serious enough. He seems serious. He's doing all this stuff. He's sacrificing. So fine. That's
Right.
usually the answer.
And was this alum? How did you go about it? What do you think your hit rate was and stuff like that? In terms of like, was it cold outreach over LinkedIn? Like, how are you actually building this stuff? Like building this?
It's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, initially it was alums. And my hit rate with them was actually almost 100%. And that's something I think I'm very lucky to have experienced. I feel like it's definitely not the norm. And I think the main reason there is because there's just not that much presence.
Right.
And so whenever they see someone eager and willing to break in, in their mind, they're thinking, okay, this is going to be helpful for everyone.
Right.
So it was 100%. Now, look, that didn't stop me from reaching out to, I don't know, like 200 to 300 others, asking for their time. And I have an Excel spreadsheet that I had put together to do that. And honestly, the hit rate there was like out of 200 or so plus people, I think it was only 3 or 4 people that actually responded in a productive way. And these are 3 or 4 people that actually got me interviews. And actually, surprisingly, one of them is the one that got me the banking internship. So
it wasn't one of the alums. It was one of the cold outreach emails that ended up being the internship you took.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So,
and interestingly enough, this news traveled because I got into, and I won't disclose the name, but it's a pretty big firm, and we had zero presence there. And so word quickly got around, and we have this professional.
Like, who is this kid? Who is this kid at
right.
this? From this non-target.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying at school it spread. The word spread at school that you got there.
At my school, right?
Got it. Okay.
Because you have these kids that are like, it's a whole different group of people, and
right.
they like prepare professionally, and they have like the alumni actually coming over and actually training them, and then you have me in parallel doing all this stuff behind the scenes, and still getting there.
Right.
So
interesting.
Look, I was at the point too, like even surprised that I had made it this far, and I kept thinking in my mind, okay, there's something that's obviously being done right here, so let me just continue to do it.
Cool.
And see where it goes.
So you reached out, got the initial, like, was this kind of cold outreach that ended up turning into an internship? Was it something where like it was one of those trips where you said, hey, I'm coming to, let's say, New York or Texas or wherever, and they said, yeah, we'll meet with you, or how did that work out?
Helpful anecdote. So one of the strategies that I was employing back then was, first reaching out to people, introducing, if if they respond back, kind of saying, okay, great, I'll keep these guys on the side for a second. And then when it came time to go visit their cities, what I would say is, I wouldn't even give them advance notice. I would say, hey, listen, I'm coming to your city on X date. I'm coming like within today or tomorrow or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only going to be there for, I don't know, 48 hours.
Yep.
And I know we've talked before. I would love to take the opportunity to meet you in person. And, and I would wait. And surprisingly, that tactic actually got me a really, really high success rate. And so that's the tactic I actually used with this bank. I went over to a city. It was not in a core city, but
wait a second. That email you would send out was to kind of the warmer leads that had already. So you had sent out, say, 200 cold. You get about, say, 15, 20 warm leads, responses back. From those, you send out something like that. I'm in your city the next 48 hours, blah, blah, blah. And you get what hit rate on that? 30%, 40% of saying, we'll meet?
I think, it varies, right? Because there were some that were very warm, but for example, in like other cities that maybe I wasn't prioritizing.
Yeah.
But, there were a handful of contacts in this specific city. And so I reached out to, the biggest contact that I had connected with and basically said, listen, I'd love to go and meet with you. And so this guy, I'll never forget, like he responded and he said, great. By the way, you're going to meet me, but also you're going to meet X, Y, Z, A, B, C. So it was pretty much the whole team. And it was it was a formal interview process. So I show up and, what they tell me is like, hey, listen, we haven't even begun our formal interview process yet, but you were the very first person we've evaluated, and we love the drive. We love all this. And you know what? You interviewed okay. I'll be honest with you. The guy's like, listen, you interviewed okay. You missed one or two technicals, but you showed us a level of seriousness, and we're okay giving you an offer. And so that happened really quickly.
Wow.
And I was astounded. I was like, I cannot believe this just happened.
That's amazing.
But look, it's important. If we take a step back and recap here, really, the story mirrors a lot of other people's stories that are on Wall Street Oasis, which is you start off in something that isn't finance. Mm-hmm. You get interested. You put a lot of work in to try to get exposure to the space and learn as much as you can and absorb. And you hopefully then, go out and network, put that stuff to use in hopes of landing an offer.
Right.
And so I was fortunate enough to have had the traction. There are a million scenarios that I could play in my head to say, okay, like maybe I couldn't have been, maybe I wouldn't have been that successful. But I was because of luck. But, I was also very tenacious. Like I never gave up. I heard no so many times that, eventually just I became numb to it.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, I'm going to succeed. I don't care if it takes me forever. I'm going to do it.
That's great. So. It's inspiring. So tell me about that. So when you get back to campus, that feeling, what was that feeling? You get that, we're okay making you an offer. Was it like an immediate, great, I'm ready to sign? Or was it like, what was that feeling like? And then tell me how you felt coming back to campus. And then let's dive into like what that actual internship was like. And was there stress around the return offer? Let's go there. And then we'll get into the PE stuff eventually. I don't want to hold you too long.
Of course. So look, and by the way, we can push a little bit longer.
Okay.
I'm okay with that. But
great.
But no, it was a pretty quick yes. I didn't tell them immediately, but I did come back to them and said, let's do it.
Great.
And that was that.
And then so the feeling must have been great, and you went back on campus. You're feeling good because you have, you're good at least for this extra semester you basically put on yourself, right?
Right.
And so that some of that stress is probably relieved. And then tell me how that all evolved. So what was next? So you kind of finished up school, and then, you started the internship, right?
Right.
And
so,
then,
a lot of people would naturally be really excited and enthusiastic, but for some weird reason with me, a little bit of anxiety started to creep up on me. Yeah. And it was really, at that point that I realized that I was putting so much effort and prioritization into the process of getting into one of these banks. It was almost like a challenge, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to beat this challenge.
Right.
But now it's suddenly like, okay, you now have to put, your money where your mouth is.
Right.
And so
you're talking a big game now. You got to deliver on the internship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the presents could only take me so far, and now it was kind of like, okay, now it's time for you to crush it. So, look, did the internship. It was great. I interned with a handful of other people, and look, it was a satellite office, and the guys had given us this message, all of us, all the intern, class coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, listen, we may hire an analyst class. We may not. We don't know yet. That part completely flew over my head. I was like, okay, I have an offer. I'm great. I feel so happy. I'm good. It didn't really register until afterwards. I'm like, wait, like there's a real chance that I go through this internship and I end up with nothing.
Right.
And so look, it caused a lot of stress.
Yeah.
I started the internship, did well. My other colleagues did very well too. It was a good group of people, but ultimately it came, at the end, and they said, listen, you know what, guys, like we're not taking on anyone. And it was a sizable number of people too.
How
so
many?
It was a structural thing.
Like 10 or so analysts, 20?
No, it was 3 to 5.
Oh, okay.
In this office.
Okay. So it's a smaller satellite office, but like they're saying we're not taking any of you guys. So that's a pretty low conversion rate, although it does give you at least a plausible story. So if they had given one offer or two offers, it would have looked worse for you.
Would have been a big
worse.
problem.
Yeah.
Big problem, right?
So the fact that they gave none, it was actually better for all of you.
Yeah.
For full-time
Look,
recruiting.
I think with this industry, like there's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of pain,
Mm-hmm.
but I think above all else, like you almost have to have this ability to step beyond yourself and look at your situation and figure out a clever way to get around it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I tried to do, at least.
Okay, so
I said, okay, like
they sat you down
immediately. I was like,
said it's not happening. You're immediately, okay, what do I do?
Right.
And so
immediately, like, look, it was a wave of anxiety when they said, listen, and they made a group announcement. It wasn't just like, hey, Kareem 101. It was kind of like, guys, like, which was not the right way to do it, I think, but it's fine. but look, immediately I thought, well, okay, none of us are getting this offer. And so news is going to quickly travel. And, the full-time interview process is a pretty limited process. So word is naturally going to travel and there's going to be legitimacy. And I was harping on that, hoping for it. And look, it started off this crazy recruiting period for me for a few weeks,
mm-hmm.
where, I was going out trying to nail whatever I could nail. And ultimately, look, I found another bank, and the bank heard the story. And I remember distinctly, it was a director.
Mm-hmm.
He sat there and he looked at me and he gave me this funny look, and I was like sweating, and I'm telling him about like why I'm not going back to my other shop. And he stares at me for like 5 or 6 seconds, and then he smiles and says, "Oh, it's okay. I've heard this from another guy too. So your story adds up." I was like, okay.
Oh man, those few seconds must have been stressful. You're like, I swear.
Right.
That's cool. Okay, right. So you're interviewing. How are you landing these other interviews? So just because you were kind of now and then you had been networking, was it just through that you were getting into processes, full-time processes?
Patrick, I honestly believe that if I had not done the legwork beforehand to cultivate a network of people,
mm-hmm.
I don't think I would be in this industry.
Yeah.
To be very open and upfront with you, I got my offer a little bit later than most processes wrapped up.
Yep.
And the only reason I got the interview in the first place was because of a contact that I initially wrote off as, okay, he's low probability.
Right.
So surprising, right?
Yep.
And I had reached out to everyone again. I basically gave them an update, and this person, specifically is like, listen, I'll loop you in. The M&A group has an opening, and we actually have a ton of openings, and we think your experience would be great.
Wow.
And so it culminated into that. Again, really like just a ton of luck. But it worked.
That's awesome. So you tell me about the process there. Was it just like they weren't on campus, I assume? So did you have to?
Yep.
Well, I guess you were done with or no, you weren't. You were kind of probably in your last
right.
semester.
I was in the last semester.
Yeah.
Right.
So how are you doing that? Did you have to fly away from school for super days and stuff like that, or were you doing? How did that whole process go down?
Totally. It was a really sensitive juggling act between, my school and this job search. And
right.
honestly, I mean, I prioritized the job search. Anyone would, I feel like.
Yeah.
And look, I'm thankful. Like it all worked out eventually. It was okay. But reflecting back on it, like I just don't buy the story of, okay, well, if you're really smart and you master everything and you get your technicals right and you get your personality right, you're good. It's just not the case. Even at this super day with this bank for full time, I saw people that, to be honest with you, I thought were very, very capable, very impressive people on paper and naturally. And, a lot of these people didn't leave that super day with an offer.
Right.
So I truly do believe, look, there's an element of luck, but I think that you counter that with an element of tenacity and being as prepared as possible. Otherwise, you're going to lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any sort of crack, there's just too many other good people who are polished enough with
Right.
knowing the technicals as well. So did you feel like you were better prepared for this full time? You had done the internship and you knew you were going to get probably asked more technicals and stuff like that. Did you feel like you were ready for that this time around? More so?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Going back to the idea of like the snowball rolling down the hill.
Yep.
It was a technically rigorous internship.
Yep.
And on top of that, this is kind of the period where I invested heavily into like, the Wall Street Oasis technical guides, the behavioral guides. Like,
yeah.
I study a lot, but I don't think I've studied more than I have.
I hope you did a lot of mock interviews. A lot of mock interviews. Yeah.
I did.
Good.
I did. And look, like I made sure that everything was down pat, story, whatever. And look, in regards to preparation too, this is something I want to touch on. After you've finished up preparing your technicals and your behaviorals, you have to add another layer to your presentation to make it as human and natural as possible.
Amen
because
to that.
Now
man.
I'm on the, I'm on the other side and I'm the one interviewing people and it's unbelievable.
You're like, you're a robot, man. I know you're just reciting. Yeah, yeah, it's bad.
And then I'll be like, at the very end when like I'm talking to a robot, I'll be like, okay, well, tell me like, what do you do for the weekends? And the guy will pull up something from like my social media and say, well, I'm also a runner. I noticed you like to run. I'm like, I was just asking you about you. You don't, it's like almost like people are trying too hard.
Wait, on a phone interview, the guy's pulling up your social media and trying to say like find commonality, like during a phone interview.
No, this was like in an in-person, but which I understand, but okay. Still, like the point is like,
yeah,
people I think take this way too seriously. You have to take it seriously, but you also have to realize that these are people that are working these jobs that are really just normal guys and girls.
Yeah.
And
they want to connect with a human.
Yeah.
They want to connect with a human,
right.
not hear a robot prepared answer. They want to actually have enjoy their time during the interview.
Right.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Making it a conversation as much as possible is super helpful.
Right.
Good to know. Okay, so you got it. You got the offer. You somehow survived the super day. What were the odds, or what did the carnage look like after that super day? What was it? 30%, 40% out of how many kids you think were there?
They told us that it was going to be a 35 to 40% offer rate.
Okay.
And they said that the offers would be broken out into two tiers. The first tier would be industry or group specific. Product or industry group specific.
Okay.
And then the other tier was kind of like, okay, you're going to get a generalist offer, but that could put you in whatever group and you don't really have much control over it. So I was fortunate enough to get an M&A specific offer.
Which is awesome.
And that was, again, it was just a function of the contact that I had. And so it's just a perfect mix of good factors. I think that's what it was.
Okay. So you did well at the interview. You came across as likable, which is key. You had your behaviorals down, your technicals. You get the offer. Is it something where are you in other processes at this point, or was this like absolutely yes right away because you were just happy to have a job, or was it something that you thought, hey, maybe there's other banks or bulge brackets I could talk to that will give me a look?
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
So it was between the bank I had, which I ultimately accepted, and Credit Suisse.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm calling out this bank specifically is because I had a really funny experience with these guys.
Sure.
So, networked through, and I reached out to a very senior guy over there, and against all odds, the guy ultimately responded and said, "Sure, we're hosting some interviews. Come by on this day. Thanks." Okay. So I I made my way up to New York, booked a hotel, not much detail, and then some mid-level guy reached out and gave me all the details.
Okay.
Incredible way to get an interview, but sure, I guess everything goes.
Was this like a super day or something? Was this a super day? Or
yeah. It was like an ultra expedited process. They were doing like, it wasn't a conventional super day. It was kind of like a 2-round.
But wait a second. So you already had your offer from the other bank? Is that correct? Or no?
So basically, I was like really far along with the other bank.
Got it. Okay.
And then and so it was, that super day hadn't happened yet, but I was talking to these guys.
Yep.
And as I was talking to them, I met this senior guy,
mm-hmm.
and it's just, he was like, well, the type of guy to like calm, friendly when you meet him, and then like in a split second, a vein pops out of his forehead. He turns tomato red and goes over and like screams his heart out at an analyst saying, "Why is this out of place?" And, this happened during my interview. And so I was looking at him and I'm thinking to myself, like, is this guy trying to like do one of these little tests to, stress me out during the interview and say I respond? But it wasn't a test because the freaking analyst ended up walking out and crying.
Oh my God.
So
it was like a good cop, bad cop in one person kind of thing. A little 100%, schizo.
100%. And then he looks over and gives me like this like cold stare. And he's like, "So tell me about yourself."
Oh gosh.
And, so I tell him about myself and we go through it. And then, he looks at the bank, which I interned at. He's like, "Oh, okay. Well," and then he flips my resume over, gives me a pen, gives me a bunch of assumptions for like a paper LBO.
Mm-hmm.
And, he says, "Figure it out." And then he gets out and goes and gets a coffee. He's like, "When I come back, it better be done."
Those were his words? "When I come back, it better be done"?
Yeah.
Was he kind of joking, or was he saying it with a straight face?
Oh, no. This guy meant business. This guy was like,
wow, what an asshole.
It was not. I mean, but look,
it's hard. Of course, you're a young kid, but he's like intimidating young kid. I mean, it's funny because if somebody did that to you now, you'd probably just start laughing, right? And then but back then, you're like, you're in college, you're like you're like just praying to get that job. Okay.
Right. Had I not been so stressed, I think I would have laughed 100%.
Okay. So,
but look, I was rattled enough. I didn't do the LBO. In fact, I kept doing this funny little twitch. I kept saying, "Interesting, interesting." It was almost like I was trying to, show him that I was thinking through it. But the reality is, like, I didn't know how to do a paper LBO as a guy fresh out of a summer analyst program.
Yeah.
And so the guy started laughing, and he's like, "Ha ha! Oh, I don't even know why they got you here. You can, I think we're done." And
Jeez.
So I was like, "Okay." So we'll walk out, and then like one of the heads of the group, called me and said, "Hey, so it looks like you had a very interesting interview process with so-and-so, and we'd like to tell you that we're moving forward with other candidates, but please, we'd like to keep you in mind later on." I was like, "Okay, thank you."
Okay.
Go to the super day for this other one and got the offer, and I was like, "You know what? I'm done. I'm not interviewing."
Yeah, after going through that experience, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Look, it's a brutal space, and I think, a lot of these guys, like, they've been hazed back in the 80s and 90s, and I think they also take advantage of the fact that you have these overeager kids that are willing to do anything to break in.
Yeah.
And so there's a natural power dynamic that develops. And again, these are extroverted, hyper alpha type people.
They like to mess with you.
They sniff weakness and they sniff insecurity, and it's just, it's rough, right?
Yeah. No, I have some rough interview stories. I had a good cop, bad cop. I was interviewing at Goldman back from undergrad, and it was just, oh man, one of the people was just like looking at, back in, you don't realize it back, but they're like looking at you like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you saying?" And they're just looking at you like you just like stink, right? And the other person's like super friendly, and they're trying to see what you do, and it's extremely awkward. But that sounds pretty bad. That sounds pretty bad. Do a paper LBO, here you go. And he just gave you some assumptions and expect you to do it out on paper. Yeah, that's rough as a.
and by the way, he didn't give me like the other. Now that I realize, like he didn't give me a good bit of the assumptions. So
Right.
anyway, whatever. Way past, way hindsight. It was a learning experience. Like, I was so fresh then that I was taking everything, and I wasn't taking it like too hard, too much, or personally. I
Right.
was like, okay, cool.
It's
I mean, this is
surprising
how it
that
is.
you went through that, and then you
Right.
you still did well at the other final, the Super Day. That could have rattled a lot
Right.
of people, I think, thinking like, oh my gosh, am I going to get another paper LBO? Are they all going to be jerks like this? And that's surprising that you were able to kind
Right.
of go in and still kind of deliver with enough confidence.
I think it was just a perfect mix of, the bank that I ultimately got an offer from was just much nicer.
Yeah.
But look, it was still a rigorous process. But, I always go back again to the snowball rolling down the hill. It's like accumulated knowledge.
Yep.
And I was making micro adjustments to my presentation, to my approach, to everything.
Yep.
With every single interaction, every single time I had an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, I
to the
think what
point
people
where
don't
honestly,
realize is
yeah.
all the networking you were doing and all the telling me about yourselves, like that probably 1,000 times you went through that was making you a better interviewer. And so
I think so.
Yeah. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.